Now, I'm going to let you know that my daughter, Scarlett, she is 2.5 years old. And Scarlett Burke loves fantasy. Loves it, loves it, loves it. She loves everything about princesses. She loves everything about castles. She loves everything about make-believe worlds. And I spend a lot of my time either reading her princess books or playing princesses with her. And my husband, Mr. Burke, he does the same thing. He's always pretending that he's the prince and he's going to save his little princess from the fire-breathing dragon. All right? And so even little teeny kids love fantasy because it's such an amazing genre, right? And I was really trying to think about what about fantasy makes it so intriguing, so interesting? Like, what can we learn from fantasy? So I was thinking about a couple of reasons, okay? The first reason is that fantasy is just like unbelievable stories, right? These things that you never thought possible in the real world happen in fantasy books, right? Everything seems bigger and more exciting in a fantasy, right? The second thing that I was thinking about is when we read about fantasies, we're kind of learning about what it's like to be a real human. Like it's called the human condition. What are the types of decisions that we have to make in life that are shown through a fantasy? So for example, lots of books that may be about ogres or dragons may not really just be about ogres and dragons. Maybe they are about good versus evil, or the quest to find something important, right? Maybe the quest to figure out how you can become something bigger and better than you once were, right? So that's something that we can all learn in a fantasy. And the third reason is that fantasies are really hard, okay? Like I said, even as we read that first chapter, it was really hard to pay attention, right? All of a sudden, the setting is becoming kind of confusing, lots of things are happening, right? We have to figure out what new time and place that we're learning about. Maybe there's multiple characters, like I heard lots of you saying, well, who's Rictus, who's Harvey? You know, you are keeping the characters straight in your mind, right? So that makes fantasy a difficult genre to read. But if we know some strategies that can help us understand fantasy, it can make it seem a lot easier, okay? So the very first strategy that I want to teach you to learn how to really understand fantasy is that one of the things that we can do as readers is we can research the setting, okay? So the setting is like the time and the place of the story, right? The setting. And we can do that by looking at the pictures and the text on the cover, okay? We can look about the back, we can read the back blurb of the book to help us research the setting. We can look at clues that tell about the character's daily life. That can help us find out about the setting. And also if there's any magic, okay? That can help us figure out the setting too, all right? Now, I'm gonna give you a little introduction to 3 main types of settings that we can read about in fantasy. The first one is that of a medieval world. So when I say a medieval world, that usually means swords, castles, dragons, the Middle Ages, all right, medieval times, right? So if you think about the movie The Lord of the Rings or Narnia, who's seen those movies, okay? Where it brings us to a far off land that was a long, long time ago, okay? That's a medieval world, okay? So you'll see castles, dragons, that's one type of medieval world, okay? The second type of fantasy setting is that in the future, okay? So think about like the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games takes place in the future, so that there's like some remnants of what life is like today, but usually it's something about how now the future's a little bit different, and it's usually kind of troublesome, like some stuff is going wrong in the future, okay? So if you're thinking about the future, think about like the Hunger Games, okay? Or maybe like future space-time travel. Yes, they're like Tomorrowland, right? Or Star Wars. Those are all examples of the future. And the last one is when the world starts off to be ordinary, but then some magic appears, okay? So in books like this, you can think of like Harry Potter, right? Harry Potter starts off in London when Harry's living with his cousin and his uncle and aunt, right, in London. But then, all of a sudden, we see how he gets brought to the school. Hogwarts, yes, he gets brought to Hogwarts, and all of a sudden this magic starts to happen, right? So that's our 3 different types of settings that happen in fantasy books, okay? So, what I want to do is I want to take a look at this book, The Paper Bag Princess. So some of you may have read this before. It's a good one, okay? And I want to go through these steps of kind of looking and researching the setting. I'm going to look at the pictures and the text on the covers. I'm going to read through the first couple of pages and see what clues I can read about, okay? But first, I'm going to read not only about the time and the place, but I'm also going to think about what kind of place this is, okay? And that's called the psychological implications. That's kind of a big word, right? Psychological implications mean what's going on inside the characters' heads, okay? So we're going to think about the time and place, but also we're going to think about what kind of place is this? And you're going to see what I mean as I start to do that work in the Paper Bag Princess. Okay, so start off looking at the Paper Bag Princess. Okay, this story is by Robert Munsch. Now I'm going to start off, and I see that there's a princess. So that makes me think about maybe like medieval times, right? Like princesses were around in medieval times. But the princess, she's got like this crown that's kind of bent on her head. She's wearing a paper bag, so that kind of makes me think like maybe she's not a typical princess. There's a dragon. Are dragons real? No. No. So that's kind of making me think that there's like a little bit of magic, right? And then I look at the back, and the dragon is fire breathing, and the girl, the princess, is like covering her ears. The Paper Bag Princess. I'm just going to read the first couple of pages. Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. Oh, so again, does it seem like medieval times, boys and girls? Yeah, right? Yes. She's got the crown on her head. I see like the stone castle with those arches. And I see like this snotty looking prince who's like not really paying attention to the princess, and she's got like little hearts around her. Seems like she's in love with him. Maybe they're in the throne room because I see some chairs. Unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all her clothes with his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. Oh my goodness. So now I'm learning a little bit more, right? I'm learning about that there's this magical component, right, to the story. And all of a sudden, this dragon, he burns her clothes off, which also seems a little magical because if he burned her clothes off, wouldn't she get burned too? Mm-hmm. But suddenly she's not really even burned. So that seems a little bit magical. So I'm kind of thinking that the physical setting is this medieval place, right? With a castle, with old-fashioned clothes, with a princess. It's a magical kingdom, right? There's a fire-breathing dragon. Her clothes get burnt up, but not really her body. But then I really want to think of what kind of place is this? Like, what kind of place is this like for the actual characters? Well, it's a place of sudden violence, right? Isn't it kind of scary that all of a sudden one scene, she's in her safe little castle, right? But then in the next page, she's getting attacked by a fire-breathing dragon? That's kind of scary, right? Right? And people's lives are getting ripped apart, right? sudden, our character is in a place where she finds herself alone, facing this horrible challenge. How is she going to go and save her one true love? Prince Ronald, right? And this is a place that kind of seems charming at first, right? Doesn't that seem so cute and so happy? But it turns unsafe in a second, okay? So think about that work we did. We looked at the covers. It didn't have a back blurb for us to read, so we couldn't do that work. But if it did, we would have. And we read just the first couple of pages, and we looked at the pictures, okay? And that really helped us make some decisions about what kind of place this really was, right? So boys and girls, I want you now to think about the thief of always, okay? So, we just really read the chapter thinking about what was going on in the chapter. We didn't really read to look for clues about the setting, did we? Okay? So, I want you now to kind of do this research work. Okay, let's look at the cover. Okay? Think about what kind of place is this? Okay? As you keep learning more about what kind of place this is, keep putting up fingers on your chest to show me that you see what kind of a place this is as you get more and more clues. So look at the cover. Okay? It's like this creepy house. I'm going to read you the back, because we didn't even read the back when I first started, right? That would have been so much smarter to do. Mr. Hood's holiday house has stood for 1,000 years, welcoming countless children into its embrace. It is a place of miracles where every childhood whim may be satisfied. There is a price to be paid, of course. But young Harvey Swick, bored with his life and beguiled by Mr. Hood's wonders, does not stop to consider the consequences. It is only when the house shows its darker face, when Harvey discovers the pitiful creatures that dwell in its shadows, that he comes to doubt Mr. Hood's philanthropy. But the house and its mysterious architect are not about to release their captive without a battle. Mr. Hood has ambitions for his new guest, for Harvey's soul burns brighter than any he has encountered in 10 centuries. So boys and girls, think, what kind of a place is this? Okay? What kind of a place is this? And then just look at those pictures again that I showed you in the very beginning. Think, what kind of place is this? What kind of place is this? This picture again, what kind of place is this? And then remember the beginning. You shouldn't waste your time sitting up here, his mom said when she came in and found him watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass of his bedroom window. You can start by tidying up that room. Think, what kind of a place is it? But then in the end of the chapter, after Rictus comes, well, how did you get in, for one thing? Through the window, of course. It's a long way up from the street. Not if you're flying. Flying? Of course, how else was I going to get around here on a foul night like this? So I want you to think about that question I asked you. What kind of a place is this? So first, I want you to think about which setting is it in this story, and then think about what kind of place is this, okay? Turn and tell your partner.
I think it's ordinary, like it's normal, and then it goes magic. Yeah, I said It's next to time.
But well, he had no, I think the house is like super happy, but at first he's go there. It's usually respected, right? I think it's the back there that she said that like yeah, but I think that regular house.
I think it's like a small town.
No, like the human one that like she tries to trick us.
I thought that was kind of like the split or like taking hands.
But I thought it was like
So, readers, in The Thief of Always, you first started asking yourself, which type of a setting is this? Caesar said this is like the modern world, right? And then all of a sudden something magical happens. So who agrees with Caesar that it starts off in the modern world, but then magic starts to happen? Okay, so that's the physical setting, right? But then, when this group that I was talking with, they were asking themselves, well, what kind of place is this? They were thinking about, well, first, they were talking about, well, you know, in February, it was dismal, bleak, boring. But then they also started to think about that new information that we looked at from the cover and from the back of the book. And they were talking about how it seemed really scary. It was full of dark magic. It was evil. Who else was having ideas like that? Okay, anyone else want to share their ideas? Right here. Yes?
So we thought it was like pretty scary and it looked like a war place. And then we thought about the title and it said The Thief of Always. So we thought like the person who through the window was like a thief, but he sent a lot of kids to the place he was talking about.
And then we started talking about like the back of the book, what you read, that he hasn't encountered any children like Harvey for 10 centuries. And we kind of did the math, and that's 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we were thinking that he must be alive always, and that's why they call him the Thief of Always.
Oh, he's been alive for that long. Who else was kind of thinking about that? Like, if you were alive for over 1,000 years, does that seem kind of magical? Right? Okay, so now we're kind of getting that feeling of what kind of place is this, right? So this work of thinking about the psychological implications of the setting is the tricky work. This is the work that's kind of harder. We can't just stop and say, oh, this is a book that takes place in the modern world. But now some magic is introduced. We can't stop there. We need to really ask ourselves, when we describe the setting, we want to think about what kind of place is this, right? And this helps us understand the setting even more. So boys and girls, don't you feel even more prepared to start tomorrow's chapter, right? Now that you understand that this world, this vacation that Harvey may be going on may not be such a happy vacation, right?
Yeah.
All right. So boys and girls, what we're going to do next is I'm going to be actually giving you some books to start doing this work on your own with. And at first, I gave you a graphic organizer for you guys to help fill out as you read. So in this column, you're going to be thinking about what was that physical place that starts your book off with, okay? And then you're going to be thinking of what kind of place is this? Now this is the type of work that you can do in any fiction book you read, right? But in fantasy, it's especially helpful. So today and every day that you're reading fiction, you can do this work. about thinking about the setting to help you understand the book. Okay? So